Hi, back in session with Professor P for Chapter 3 of Archaeology. Once again, you could follow along with your concept sheet, and sometimes I won't go over all of them. You could look those up as well. So let's start off with culture. This is the great stuff. Culture is learned behavior. Culture is learned values. Culture is passed down from one generation to another. You learn culture from your peers, from your family. All of you have culture. You understand, whether it's the big culture like American culture. What defines American culture? As easy as apple pie, as easy as baseball. It could be as more complex as democracy, capitalism. When we look at culture, we look at the values that we acquire over our lifetime and they begin to change. In archaeology, we want to look at the cultural context of the past. What were people's ideologies? What were their values? What were they passing on, right? It's very unique. Every culture's adapting, right? Every culture's in the midst of change. Every culture is always doing something, right? So we have to remember that. How is human culture important to the field of archaeology? Because it includes everything. Art, marriage, politics, religion, language. Wow, I get so passionate about this. Human culture is all of who we are. We do have our little family culture, right? Some of you may take off your shoes before entering a house, right? Some of you, your parents have, their own values that might be different from your friends. And then we have those bigger cultures, that American culture, right? And then some may have Latino culture, and some may have, other values, right? Mandarin values and Chinese values. It's varying, right? And it's very important to understand culture's always in the midst of change, and we're always acquiring it. We acquire it in utero, right? With language, the American language, right? And people all over the world are getting culture, and they're acquiring different cultural traits. It's important to archaeology because as we're getting all these ecofacts and artifacts and everything we get, we're trying to reconstruct culture. It's like a puzzle. Let's put it back together. What were they doing? What were roles, gender roles? What was the idea of marriage? Did they live in family groups? We can go on and on and on. Let's get to the adaptive views. That's really culture operating within the ecosystem. Sort of ecology, the environment is shaping that behavior of yours, right? The ideational approach really wants to look at cognition, what we're learning, what's going on in the human mind, right? What's going on with our cognition and our cognitive code, right? They really want to understand the brain and the dynamics of thought. Patterns of discard is really looking at the remains of the past and how it reflects culture. All right, let's get to things like Leslie White. Leslie White was an anthropologist and wanted to look at culture as a system. It's interacting, it has parts. It's part of this concept of functionalism. Let me give you an easy example. Most of you might be at home, you have a refrigerator, right? Most of you drive an automobile. Every part of that automobile has to keep the automobile functioning. If I take off the wheels, it's not going to ride. If I take out the engine, it's not going to drive. If I take off the steering wheel, it's not going to steer. Functionalism and looking at culture as a system is that everything within the system, everything within the culture has to make it keep going. So if we take an automobile, we can say art, politics, religion, child rearing. All of that is part of the system. Marriage is part of the system. It doesn't mean we're all going to get married, but it's part of the system and it keeps the system functioning, right? It looks at all those interlinking parts to make the whole system keep going. All right, culture change is always going on. We always want to look at how there's one change in one part of the system. It could affect the other part of system. We got to analyze this, right? For example, I can use the automobiles, example. If you get a change in the automobiles, let's look at Ford. Let's look at the 1900s, the early 1900s, and you go, okay, that was the automobile. Let's look at Tesla today. And you go, oh my God, there's a big difference, right? Why? What did that have to do with culture? What did that have to do with values? What did that have to do with what's going on in our society, right? That becomes important to look at cultural change. Another example of cultural change is when we were hunting and gathering, and then all of a sudden we went to Neolithic Revolution 10,000 years ago, and we go, oh, now we're going to do agriculture. How did us growing stuff and not hunting and not gathering change our whole society? It changed everything about our society, right? Capitalism, power, all of that. In the beginning, people who controlled the food system were the ones in power, right? Can you imagine that? Even today, it's still similar. So we got to look at change, right? That becomes very important. There are 5 goals of archaeology, the goals of archaeology. The very first one is stewardship. Stewardship is really looking at conservation, preservation of sites for the future, right? That becomes very important to understanding the cultural history, right? Number two is reconstructing. It's really studying of ancient human behavior, not the artifacts, looking at the life ways of human activity, right? Looking at subsistence patterns, right? Looking at human interaction and religion and things like that. The third goal of archaeology is to study and explain culture and social change. Why did we have to change, right, to agriculture? Why didn't we just stay the same, right? So we want to really analyze that as well. Number 4 is conservation of the archaeological record. So burial sites, right? Quarries, religious sites, right? Stonehenge, right? All those kind of things, the temples, right? Conservation of those kinds of things, right? The last one is context. Context is very important to understand because the context is really the position in time and space of the actual artifact. So we're wanting to explain the story. If we find something in the ground, what was it near? How far was it? How deep was it? Was it, near another artifact, right? Context is really the actual time and space where we found something. All right, that becomes important. All right, the primary context is the original position of the artifact. So an original burial site or an original site. The secondary context is where the primary context, the original site, was already disrupted by natural events or by humans, right? Like the humans went in, sort of destroyed some of the pyramids, right? We would be looking at the secondary context because we already went and did something to it, right? Primary is the original context in time and space, the artifact. Secondary was when it was already affected by man. All right, I hope you enjoyed chapter 3. Trying to do these quick so you don't, right, get strayed. All right, have a good one. Stay safe and healthy during this time. See you next time for chapter 4.